Hey, it's Rich the Architect again. Another question that I get a lot from a potential new client, whether it's an email or phone call, besides cost, is how long is this going to take? And similar to the cost, how long it's going to take has a number of different variables associated with that. Sometimes I'll have a client who'll come in and they already have like their zoning and land approval already done. They can, sometimes you can, there's a lot of places you can actually get that taken care of yourself through the towns, depending on what it is. So I do have clients who come in with already that approval in place. So that could take one level out of it, and usually two if there is a zoning approval already there. The design is a little bit more fine-tuned, rather than somebody saying, hey, I want to do an addition or I want to do this new construction project, but I don't really have any, we have to develop the ideas. On the zoning end, somebody already, if they're getting a zoning approval, they have already nailed down, like, this is what we want to build. We want to build this 2-bedroom addition. We want to build this new, restaurant or some other commercial new construction project. So that time, becomes much shorter if some of those land approvals are already there. Now, if they aren't there, then it comes into play of like, well, if you don't have any, you may have a rough idea of like, hey, I want to do this addition or this new home or this new business, but then the specifics aren't really worked out. So there's going to be a period of time of designing that needs to happen and back and forth with the client to, come up with, whatever whatever the plan is for this project. So that could be a variable of, sometimes, I come up with a design and give it to the client and they're fine with it and we move right along. So that might take like 2-3 weeks to turn that around. But, other clients, it could be a variable of, like some back and forth, and, it could take 2-3 months to get that plan to nail down. So I typically do say, yeah, like that 3-week time period. I do include some revisions to that design, but with a caveat of like, okay, well, for, let's say there's 3 rounds of revisions, but, if it takes 3 weeks to come up with the first design, it's going to be a week or 2 per every other revision. Potentially. So again, like I said, it could be like 2 to 3 months for that. Bigger jobs could be even longer. Now, once there is a design in place and plan, I typically will say, like, if there's a zoning approval that needs to happen, that can be, 3 to 4 weeks. And then the building permit drawings can be like another month or 2, or even, 3. Of course, if the jobs are bigger, these numbers, the numbers become bigger. But like I'll say on the residential side, that's typically, 2 to 3 weeks for zoning, another 3 to 4 weeks for building permit. Now, then there's also another part of that in terms of time of actually starting to build in the field, and where what comes into play there is the approval process that the town or the city has. So once you submit an application for whether it's a zoning approval or a building permit approval, the simple response there is, well, typically the town or the city has, by law, has 3 weeks to approve, to go through and review the plans and then come back with their response and hopefully approval. So if it takes 3 weeks for both those approvals, if you need that, that's another month and a half. So it's never going to be a situation where, even if somebody came to me like, hey, I have I already have the zoning approval, I need this, and I need to start building in like 2 weeks. That's not happening. That's just not. 3 weeks right there, for the town by law. So, it's going to be a good, 3 months is probably your best case scenario. if you need like all those full services. Now, some smaller jobs, like if you're doing like a one-room addition, or let's say a roof deck or a deck off of a house, those can be a little bit less than that 3 month. But that is where I typically see, on the quickest is a 3 month turnaround, but it could be even more, 6 months, depending on the complexity of the project, and be much longer. I mean, I had a project it took 1.5 years to get just the zoning approval for a client, and that was a case where it was a homeowner and it was a residential renovation, but it became more complicated because this client's wanted their business in the basement, so there had to be another level of approvals with the town for the business to be in the home, which required variances, and the variance is a whole other process that could take months to get. So if you don't know what a variance is if you go in for an application for like, let's say you're doing a zoning approval. So in the case of this one client, they're doing a residential renovation to the home, but also going to have a business in it. So they have to have two different zoning approvals, one for the home renovation, but then the other one is, and there's actually two parts to it on the commercial side. There's a use approval on the zoning. So they have to get the approval that they're allowed to have their business there, because you couldn't have, like, let's say if you were some type of like manufacturing company, you couldn't have your manufacturing of your product in the home for the most part. But if you were like a professional like myself, like an architect or a lawyer, you are allowed to have that based in your home. So it might be it may depending on where your home is, it may not be allowed, and you'd have to go for a variance. But here it was somebody was a professional, but there was some other, they had clients coming in on a daily basis. So there'd be issues of parking and whatnot. So that had to become a variance for them to be allowed to have their business in their home. So, and I mentioned the like parking and stuff like that. So there was two parts of that zoning: was the use, but then the actual zoning approval of what they wanted to build, and it was related to the parking lot layout, or the parking layout, landscaping there. Because in the residential, didn't want to look like a commercial like parking lot, so it needed to work. We had to work out like a driveway, and like we kind of hid the parking spaces for the business from the street. Kind of worked with the home was on a bit of a hill, so it wasn't driving by the home. It didn't look like a business. Was the approach we took there. So, but again, that took, like I said, it was a very tough approval. And it took 1.5 years to actually get that approval. So, it could vary, because we had to go in front of the board like 2 or 3 different times, because there were 2 parts to that approval, and there were some back and forth, some suggestions from the board. Like, they didn't approve it right away, so we came back later with some changes to try to get the board to approve, and obviously it ended up eventually getting approved and moved forward. So once that approval happened, though, then the building permit approval was just a typical building permit type approval. We submitted the building permit drawings and got the building permit, like a month or 2 later, or if I remember correctly. So it is a variable in terms of how complex that building is. Like in that case, for that zoning approval, there was some objections to the public. When you go in front of a zoning board for a variance, it's a public meeting. So, any neighbors or anybody from the public is allowed to come in, and actually, there's a comment period during the hearing where they're allowed to, voice their objections or support for the project. So there was that had some of the play of like the initial, not getting approved and having to come back. So, so there are, situations like that, and if a client really wants it, they're going to, make those changes, try to work with the public, try to work with the zoning boards or the cities, and, to try to get their project to move forward. So again, it's, on the short end, you can have, turn around something in 2 to 3 months. Some things could be, a year and a half, 2 to 3 years, depending on how complex it is. So every project is different, even though they may be the same. So if you can kind of follow that, so that, helps with the town. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, please comment with any additional questions related to this below on this post, or contact me through my website, Dauntless DC, for the firm Dauntless Design Collaborative. If you have any more questions, or if if you have a project that you'd like to move forward. So hopefully, I'm hoping this is helpful. And again, this is Rich, and we'll see you next time. All right.